let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. It's WallBuilders Live, and we're talking about today's hottest topics on policy, faith, and the culture. Always from a biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective, and obviously with all that's going on in Washington, D.C., and frankly, what's going on with in our own lives, in our local communities. We need truth. We need that biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of WallBuilders Live. Visit our website today, wallbuilderslive.com, partially because there's just a lot of great information there, and that's where you can make a donation to help us out, to help us do what we do and spread that truth even more. But also because we're going to be catching the tail end of a presentation David Barton did a few days ago. And if you missed the first part, or first few parts of that, they are available on our website right now at wallbuilderslive.com. We'll catch the end of that presentation today. It's called Running to the Roar. And then after that, we'll get some of that good news because it is Friday, so it's Good News Friday around here at WallBuilders. My name is Rick Green. I'm a former Texas legislator and America's Constitution coach. I encourage you to visit constitutioncoach.com today if you'd like to be part of the solution, if you'd like to host Constitution classes in your home or at your church. We have Biblical Citizenship in Modern America available to you. All of it is for free. How about that? For free. We're going to equip you to be the catalyst in your community for a restoration of biblical values and constitutional principles. So check out constitutioncoach.com today. I am here with David Barton. He's America's premier historian and our founder here at WallBuilders. Tim Barton's normally with us. He's a national speaker and pastor and president of WallBuilders. But today we're going to jump into that presentation, and then David's going to share some good news with us, and that's all we're going to have time to do today. So, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back from the break, we will be picking up right where we left off yesterday with David Barton's presentation, Running to the Roar. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back on WallBuilders Live.
Hey guys, we want to let you know about a new resource we have here at WallBuilders called The American Story. For years, people have been asking us to do a history book, and we've finally done it. We start with Christopher Columbus and go roughly through Abraham Lincoln, and one of the things that so often we hear today are about the imperfections of America, or how so many people in America that used to be celebrated or honored really aren't good or honorable people. One of the things we acknowledge quickly in the book is that the entire world is full of people who are sinful and need a Savior, because the Bible even tells us that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And yet what we see through history, and certainly is evident in America, is how a perfect God uses imperfect people and does great things through them. The story of America is not the story of perfect people, but you see time and time again how God got involved in the process and used these imperfect people to do great things that impacted the entire world from America. To find out more, go to wallbuilders.com and check out The American Story.
We're back on WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us. Jumping in right now to where we left off yesterday with David Barton's presentation earlier this week called Running to the Roar. Here we go.
John Quincy Adams was the sixth president of the United States from 1825 to 1829. He's president. And then when he finished his presidency, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. And he spent the next 17 years in the House of Representatives. In total, he spent 70 years in public service. So 17 years in the House of Representatives. He dies in the House of Representatives. He is the huge anti-slavery leader at the time. He hates slavery. It's an abomination. His nickname was the Hellhound of Abolition. But his problem was he served in a Congress that was 80% pro-slavery. So he's anti-slavery and 80% pro-slavery Congress. And he was introducing anti-slavery stuff so regularly that Congress passed what's called a gag order. Said if you introduce, you can introduce any subject you want to in Congress as long as it's not anti-slavery. It was directed specifically at him. So for the next 10 years, he was not allowed to do that. He kept doing it anyway. He got in trouble all the time. They tried censure, they tried reprimand, they tried expulsion. We even have political ads of him in the day where it shows him with a bullseye on his forehead, said, "Someone kill this man, get him out of Congress." So they were after him because of his anti-slavery position. And about 10 years into it, reporters say, you just don't seem to be able to get a whole lot done in Congress. There's just not much you're getting done. They oppose you, or they oppose what you're doing. And yet you continue to do this. Don't you get depressed or frustrated? He said, no. I said, why? Listen to his answer. He said, because duty is ours, results are God's. I don't care how it turns out. I'm just going to do the right thing all the way. He eventually converted enough people in Congress where they rescinded that gag order. On the day they did, they gave him an ivory cane with a gold band on it with his name and the date that they had repealed the gag order on that day, one of his greatest victories. And although he said duty is ours, results are God's, he was human, and in his diary he wrote, God forgive me, but it sure was nice to get that cane. It's like I finally won one, I get one win in my life. And so I mean, he's amazing. And in his time in Congress, he mentored a number of younger people. And there was one guy he mentored that was interesting. This guy, I mean, he does all this anti-slavery stuff, and he's trying to ban slavery in Washington, D.C. He came up with the constitutional amendment to ban slavery back in 1843, 20 years before the Civil War. I mean, he's doing all this anti-slavery stuff. And in the middle of mentoring this guy, he dies on the floor of Congress. And so he died there, he drew his last breath in Congress. And this young freshman kid was appointed to be one of the official people of the funeral procession in Congress, this young freshman kid. And so this kid was so inspired by John Quincy Adams, he wants to do something good, so he runs for the Senate, and he runs for all these offices and lost every single thing. He did not win another office until he was elected President of the United States 15 years later. It's this guy named Abraham Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln goes on to end slavery, called the Great Emancipator. And by the way, John Quincy Adams, that was the millennial of his generation. He's the old man. This is the young kid that's just arrived in Congress, doesn't know up from down or anything else. He gets mentored by this older guy. And Lincoln is the guy that is called the Great Emancipator. He is the guy who brought the end of slavery, passed a number of civil rights acts. And so as you look at Lincoln and the end of slavery, John Quincy Adams never saw the end of slavery, but he got to train the guy who ended slavery. See, that's what a revival looks like. And this is part of the Second Great Awakening, by the way. You notice that all this happened in the Second Great Awakening, that time period from 1801 to 1878. This is what happens in revival. You train the next generation. So that's the fifth thing. The sixth and final thing I'll give you real quick is it requires hard work. Go back to George Whitefield. I told you already earlier what he did with his preaching. If it hadn't been for his preaching, we would not have the United States of America. He had a whole lot of opposition. I'll point out most of his opposition came from Christians. This is the way revivals are. You'll find the church turn on itself. The greatest opponents I have against me are all Christians. Man, what they have done, the amount of money they spend on me and what they do on my Wikipedia page, everything else, it's Christians. Secular guys, not nearly the problem Christians are. And that's what happens anytime you have a revival is you've got people who don't think biblically attacking the people who do think biblically, and you have this conflict going on. That's the way it was with Whitefield. The preachers told their parishioners to go get in a tree over Whitefield and pee on him and defecate on him. Throw potatoes at him, throw rocks at him. This guy is radical. It's old wineskins versus new wineskins. That's always a revival, is the old guys can't handle the new guys. And so the church is often the last to get on board. Now, at the end, the church says, we had a great revival. Yeah, you guys got on board about 80% through it. You were fighting it most of the way. The church often fights revival because it's God doing something new, and they're used to what's old. They're comfortable with what they're doing, and they don't want to be challenged to do something new, and they don't make the transition. They finally see that the nation is going that way, and then they get on board, and that's the way most revivals go. So over his 18,000 sermons that he preached, he would travel the United States on horseback. He made 7 trips from Maine down to Georgia, back to Maine, down to Georgia on horseback, all year long, all types of weather, on horseback, going back and forth. He carried a portable pulpit with him. He would sit it up in a town. He would preach. He would disciple. He would mentor, and then he would go to the next town. And so this is what Whitefield did over that period of time. So again, 80% of all Americans heard him. But here's the deal. His preaching killed him. He didn't know he was in a revival. The last 2 years of his life, after he would preach, he would go off to the side and cough up a bunch of blood and throw up his guts, and he'd get back on his horse and go to the next town and do the same thing. It literally killed him. He is buried in a church in Massachusetts where he died in 1770. If you ask Whitefield, was it fun to do what he did? Probably say no, but it's what God had him doing. Duty is ours, results are God's. It's a lot of hard work that goes in a revival. So just change our mindset. I mean, I am convinced America's going to get turned around, but if you think it's going to happen without a Bible, or without a battle, you don't understand run to the roar. This is the time for the church to step up and run to the roar, take leadership, start doing all the things that are part of revival, which is the mentorship. And I say the church. I don't mean the church. I mean you. every one of us. You go find somebody to mentor. You find somebody to disciple. You get one person, bring them to Christ, and then help them think right. You get some kids in school. Do something individually. Individually take on this battle, and we win this battle. If we keep standing back and waiting for the group to do it, it's not going to happen. So revival is characterized by much hard work. It's not inspiration that does it. You got to be committed to duty. So closing this thing out, that's the 6 things. So the question is, do you really want revival? If you do, here are the 6 things that always go with it. Individual and local action, willingness to disciple others, practical applications of the Bible. It's a process, not an event. You got to hang in there till you win. It's transgenerational mentoring and lots of hard work. That's all part of running to the roar. God bless you guys.
All right, friends, that was the conclusion of David Barton's presentation on Running to the Roar. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get some good news because it is Good News Friday. Stay with us. You're listening to WallBuilders Live. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty in Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com. Welcome back to WallBuilders Live. Thanks for staying with us today. That previous segment was the closing part of a presentation from David Barton called Run to the Roar. We spread it out over several days this week, and all of those parts are available at our website, wallbuilderslive.com. So if you just joined us today, or maybe even yesterday, and you want to get that entire presentation, just go to wallbuilderslive.com, click on the archive button, and then you can listen to each of those programs. For the remainder of our time today, let's get some good news. Normally, our entire Friday program is a Good News Friday. David, we got some time left, couple segments here. So what's some good news you can share with us from the last few weeks?
Well, let me start with something that happened in Texas with education. And there's a whole lot going on in education that's not good news, but this was. Texas and California are the 2 states that really drive a lot of the published textbook curriculum. Not necessarily the online stuff, but the published textbooks and traditional textbooks, etc. Those 2 states have almost a fourth of the nation's public school kids. And so publishers publish for the standards in Texas and for the standards in California because that's the biggest markets and that's where they make their money back. So the published standards from Texas and California that hit the textbooks, that's what's going to be going to Idaho and to Kentucky and to Tennessee and to Georgia and everywhere else because those states just don't have enough kids to make it profitable for publishers to publish. So having said that, Texas, like other states, goes through reevaluation of its standards every so often. As we talked about last week, Minnesota is looking at changing their history social studies standards. They do that every 10 years. This week, we've been contacted by 4 other states asking for help with their standards. They do that every however many. And so Texas, every 12 to 15 years, they will do their standards. So what we most recently did in Texas were our health textbook standards. Now, health textbook in recent years has grown in including everything related to sex education. And so in sex education, it has really gone pretty fast and pretty far left. You know, what California has done and everything else, it's very aggressive. And so it's interesting that most of those groups that are really, I want to say, anti-traditional sexual relations or anti-biblical sexual relations, anything that is kind of outside of what the Bible says and what traditional morality has been, they showed up in Texas because they want to see Texas change its standards. Because if you can get all of Texas standards to look like California standards, then guess what the whole nation's going to get? I mean, it's not going to be good stuff, at least from a biblical standpoint. So as they came to Texas, the guys on our State Board of Education were prepared for all sorts of stuff, and a lot of it happened. And there's just, all these national groups that descended. And of course, one of the things is what do we do with genders? We need to be gender friendly, etc. And there were some things that emerged in Texas I thought were very interesting. We've had what has been known as the LGBTQ movement. And it had been those 5 traditional letters, at least in recent years, it's been LGBTQ. So, but now they've had so many additional genders. I think as of, I guess 3 years ago, maybe they stopped counting genders because it was somewhere over 90. And so you can't have 90 letters. And we've seen anywhere from 13 to 17 letters be part of that list of acronyms, that LGBTQ, and then all the other letters. And so what was it going to be? And so it turned out that all these groups in Texas had pretty much agreed that the new standard is going to be LGBTQIA+. And so the IA is intersectionality and et cetera. And so that's now going to cover the however many hundreds of orientations you claim you can have, because instead of, again, having established truth and standards, you get to make up your own. And if you want to make up one that belongs only to you, that's your call. You can do that. So it's interesting that that's probably the new terminology we're going to be hearing across the nation, is LGBTQIA+. That emerged out of these hearings, but there were 3 things I thought were really interesting that needs to be a good heads up for the rest of the nation. One is that Texas and our health standards, we are very pro-life, and we're very traditional in our standards. We still say sexual activity needs to be abstinence-based. We need to say refrain from sexual activity until you're married. And so we still hold those older kind of standards in our health textbooks, and they wanted to get all that changed. And so one of the things is, being a pro-life state as we are, they said, here's the Christian position. Back in the Bible, God said to Adam and Eve, you need to multiply, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth. So they said, the earth's replenished, no need to be fruitful and multiply anymore. And that's why God gave us abortion. God gave us abortion because this is the answer to the overpopulation we now have. We've obeyed God's commands. It's time to obey his new command. And I thought it was really interesting that they have taken the abortion thing and tied it to Genesis and said, this is God's command for this generation right now. And so that's what they were trying to get in the textbooks as well, knowing that a lot of states, whether it be Georgia or whether it be Tennessee or whatever, more conservative in their standards. So that was an interesting piece. The other piece is, since we say abstinence is abstinence-based education, they said, well, yeah, abstinence, but you can go ahead and have other types of sex. And they were very graphic in what they said. And that's not having traditional biblical sex, because biblical sex is a man and a woman. Therefore, if you have sex and it's not a man and a woman, well, then it doesn't violate the command on sex between a man and a woman. And so this is a Christian thing. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So that's the new mantra that's coming out, is the Christian definition of sex is, well, if you're not going to have traditional man-woman sex, any of this other sex, that's not what the Bible talks about. So you can have that kind of sex and still be a good Christian. So that's interesting. But
unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. But the third one was they wanted to change the age of sexual consent down into the elementary school level. And so they wanted it dropped. If you can imagine that, age of consent goes down. If we're going to do that, why don't we just go ahead and lower voting to 10 years old or 11 years old or 12 years old? Why don't we lower driver's licenses down? Why don't we do everything, just say age is not a factor in anything, experience. You don't need maturity. Let's just drop it. So that's what they were after. The good news is that we beat back every single one of the things they wanted. That did not get changed in its fundamental basis. The Texas, we updated some things in it, but generally the Texas health standards are what they have been for the last several years, which means that at least the nation's public schools will not be inundated with a California-only sex ed approach. Texas has put some kind of a kink in that because of all the publishers having to use Texas standards as well. So that's the good news.
Yeah, and that's good news for the whole country, right? Because like you're saying, that will impact textbooks in other states as well.
Yeah, this is going to impact what gets in published textbooks. Now, this won't alter online curriculum. It won't alter what we're seeing with people offering free sex ed curriculum, or in the case of 1619. 1619 is not going to get a lot of their thesis into traditional textbooks. So what they're doing is offering curriculum online free, and the Pulitzer Center has got the 16.9 curriculum. You can get it free at your school and download it. And so teachers are doing that all over the nation, because if it had to go through regular publishing of textbooks, most of that stuff's not going to make it. It's just not going to stand the test of other historians looking at it. So that's still available out there. There's going to be Planned Parenthood will have online curriculum for sex ed, et cetera. So you could have a super conservative state like Oklahoma using super liberal sex ed curriculum because they download it online. But for the schools that still use published curriculum, what has happened in Texas is going to at least hold the line on at least partially hold the line on drifting further left on sexual morality, which it's good to start holding the line and even trying to push back toward more traditional standards.
Going to take a quick break. As we're going to break, the two really good pieces of good news I got out of that, David. One, like you said, we stopped it in the actual textbooks that are the physical textbooks the kids would have, and then two, they really showed their hand. We know some of the things that are coming, so that we can be better prepared to fight against that in states across the country. It's an awful, evil agenda that is being perpetrated on our kids across the country. We need this information for folks to be able to fight back at the local level in their local school boards and local school districts as well. Quick break. We'll be right back. We got time for a little bit more good news before we close out today. Stay with us. You're listening to WallBuilders Live.
This is Tim Barton from WallBuilders with another moment from American history. Many today assert that religion is something private, that it has no place in the public square, and that it is incompatible with government. But the Founding Fathers believed exactly the opposite. They held that religion was absolutely necessary in order to maintain our free system of government. For example, John Adams declared, "We have no government armed with power, capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion." And signer of the Declaration, Benjamin Rush, similarly affirmed, "Without religion, there can be no virtue, and without virtue, there can be no liberty, and liberty is the object and life of all Republican governments." The Founding Fathers understood that limited government required public morality from the people, and that public morality was produced by the Christian religion. For more information about the Founding Fathers' views on religion and public life, go to wallbuilders.com.
We're back here on WallBuilders Live. A little bit of time left for some final good news before we go into the weekend. David, what's our last piece of good news today?
Well, let me go to this headline. It says Malawi plans to open embassy in Jerusalem by next summer. That's good. The Middle East peace deal is still growing, more and more nations. And I've got to say, the one before this, Sudan, I would never have imagined ever that would happen with Sudan. They have been so, hardcore, almost ISIS level Islamic folks that I just thought there was never any way that was going to occur. That has been one of those areas where they've had civil wars and everything because of Christians living there, and the Islamic guys that are so radical there have been coming after killing Christians, etc. Big civil war, big national split, etc. And to see that Sudan stepped in, and now Malawi does as well. That Middle East deal, this is getting better and better and better. What Trump did there was it's a generation-shifting thing, and no telling how many lives will be saved in the fact that these governments have taken an official position in favor of recognizing Israel, of talking, negotiating with Israel. So that's really going to cut the feet out of a lot of the terrorist efforts that are trying to take out Israel, because it really had been Israel and America versus the rest of the Islamic world, and that narrative is shifting now, which is really good.
And I, David, do you remember how many countries now that Trump was able to get those peace treaties done?
I think this is either the 5th or the 6th, and I think there's 14. I think it's 14 total who said that they were planning to do the same thing. So I think last I knew there were 26 major Islamic nations, and that'll give you more than half if it continues on the same path and same trend. Hopefully the Biden administration won't do anything to discourage that. But nonetheless, Middle East peace is becoming more and more of a reality, and it's great to see these new nations jumping on board.
Such good news, and probably one of the most important parts of the Trump legacy and what he did in this 4 years. Thanks for that good news today, David. We need that, certainly with all that's going on, and as we go into the weekend, folks, we're not being just ignoring the bad news. If you've been listening, we've been covering the election for the last 2 months on a daily basis, keeping up with all of the twists and turns and the oddities, not only of how the election took place, but the unconstitutional things that took place, the conflict, what happened at the Capitol. I mean, all of these different things, the constitutional perspective on it. We've been covering all that. So if you want to go to our website, wallbuilderslive.com, look in the archives of the last few weeks, you will get plenty of content on that front. Next week, once again, we'll be covering these things. Tony Perkins is going to be with us from Family Research Council on our Monday program. And throughout the week, we will give you that biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective. And then we're going to ask you to share that. In fact, even today's program, if you would share it with your friends and family, get the links there at wallbuilderslive.com. Make your donation there. When you donate to WallBuilders Live, as you know, we're a listener-supported program. So it only happens with those supporters out there that listen to the program, supporting financially as well. And listen, we're at a point in our country where, we're at that lives, fortune, sacred honor point. We've got to start giving some time. We've got to start being willing to invest in freedom. That's why we ask you to host Constitution classes, get involved in campaigns, be a part of the solution at your church and in your community. That's time. It takes time. That is your life. But fortunes also, lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. You got to donate to good candidates. You got to donate to good causes. WallBuilders Live is one of those causes. It gives us the ability to speak truth on a weekly basis and get this information out there to train people. The reason we can give away classes for free is because of your donation. So please consider making those donations today at wallbuilderslive.com. And then sacred honor. Speak truth, friends. Don't be coward into silence. Don't be intimidated. We have to stand up right now and use the peaceable means at our fingertips. We have that. We can do this the right way. We've always done this the right way, and we encourage you to continue to do that. Stand up and speak truth out there on social media, even with the threats of being banned. Out there, every chance you get, talking with friends and family. Speak that truth. And to be able to speak truth, you got to seek truth, and that's what WallBuilders Live is all about. So thanks so much for being a part of it. Thanks for listening today. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand undivided.